Welcome to the Chey and Pav podcast experience.
You're listening to the Chey and Pav Show, teachers talking teaching.
We're two middle school teachers sharing our reflections, insights about the topics that matter the most in the classroom. So hey, Pav, join us in the hallway or even the parking lot, or better yet, how about the staff room?
Hello and welcome to episode 132 of the Chey and Pav Show. Thank you for joining us as we sit around the table to talk teaching. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, and we've got a lot of words for you tonight as we talk about the ways that we include photographs in our teaching of important content in the classroom. We are happy to be here to chat with you about this topic, as we are about the vast amount of topics in education. I'm eager to get into this conversation, but we've got some explaining to do first. That is, explaining about who we are. My name is Pav Wander, and I'm half of this hosting team. My co-host is next to me, and he's going to tell you exactly who he is.
Well, Pav, they tell me you're a podcaster, but you ain't much sure of a dresser. We wear caps and sleeves at this level, son.
I have no idea what this is.
Good.
Okay.
So we can leave this for the audience.
Sleeves, caps and sleeves. I don't know. A league of their own.
Oh, no. Don't look at me like I got it. You didn't get it. You didn't get it. But you're pretty close.
Major League.
Oh, you got it. They tell me you're a pitcher, son, but you ain't much of a dresser. We wear caps and sleeves at this level, son.
I should have guessed Major League first, but I always get those two movies mixed up.
I don't. How can you get those two movies mixed up?
It's just the title, not the content.
I thought you were going to say Major League because every time we're out, I always use the line from the restaurant.
Yes.
Hey, you want me to drag you outside? Well, if you know the movie, you know the next line, and you know why I can't say it. If you don't know the movie, shame upon you and all your friends.
I bet you they know A League of Their Own.
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it.
No. Actually, I haven't seen it.
Come on.
I've never seen A League of Their Own.
Well then, I guess
we got things to do.
I guess that's what we're doing after the show.
Cut. End the episode now. We're done in 5 minutes, folks. Thank you for joining us on the Chey and Pav Show. I got things I got to do. Pav, you know what? One, I'm Chey Cheney.
Yes, you are.
The remaining half of this episode, of this dynamic duo. You know, we say episode 132, but I was looking as I dive into the social media space and other podcasts, I'm on episode 200 and blah, blah, blah. I'm on episode I said, how could we be so far behind? And then I realized we're not. I think we have over 200 recordings because early on we didn't actually number
But that's right.
our interview episodes as episodes.
Yes.
So it's got to be the most fraudulent 132 total that's out there.
I think Anchor will tell us, or I guess it's Spotify for podcasters now, will tell us that it's like 230 something.
I'm just going to go give a wink over there to our producer, and they'll look it up, and they'll just chime it back in my ear as we're recording.
Okay.
And they'll let me know.
Yes, it is.
They're not responding. Like I guess your neighbor on that porch across the window doesn't actually consider themselves the producer, and they're wondering why I'm giving these signals to look things up.
They just wave back
politely.
Yes.
All right, Pav, we're here to talk about photography and our use of photos.
Photos, yeah. And and everybody, we don't really do a lot of talking before we hit record on this episode. We kind of agree on a topic, and then we hit record. Like I do my planning, and then Chey does his planning, and then we hit record. So I might have completely different content than you on this topic. You're talking about photography, and I haven't really talked about photography in my planning. I've talked about photos.
Yes, that's what I meant.
Okay, because I thought maybe you were going to include a little bit of photography in this.
No, because I probably do a lot more. No. That's also an incorrect. I love both photos and photography.
Yes, you do.
I'm not here to talk about photography.
Okay.
Unless you want to talk about selfie tips.
Well, I'm pretty good at those.
Oh, I know. I was about to say, then you have some, because I have none. The only tip you gave me for selfies was get a haircut. And you did. So when you see some of our pictures for this episode, you're like, whoa.
Who's that guy?
It's not the Wolverine. But Pav, as I look over to our schedule, we have a little thing called banter, and I'll integrate banter. Also talk about some of the things we are up to. Mm-hmm. And so ETT Federation Day is coming up, and we are excited to be hosting a presentation to talk about podcasting, the hardware, the software, some of our examples, and how we use it to introduce stories into space. So Federation Day, come down and see us.
That's December 8th, yes, at the Beanfield Center. So hopefully if you are in the Toronto area, you are able to make it down. If you're a member of ETT, Elementary Teachers of Toronto, you're able to join us as we talk about student-led podcasting and all of the aspects of that process.
Yes.
You're laughing. Why? I don't know why.
I'm laughing because as you were talking about that, it reminds me of a TikTok you made.
Okay.
Where it was the two puppies looking at each other strangely when people giving professional development on podcasts who haven't done podcasts.
Yes.
Pardon me?
Confused look.
I went,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It boggles my mind when there are people that are delivering podcasting professional development, or people who are talking about how to create student-led podcasts, but have never done it. Have just heard about the magic that it can create in the classroom, and it does. But I'd love to hear about student-led podcasting from individuals who have engaged in student-led podcasting in the classroom.
It goes into my rant of when educators identify themselves as educators because they want the credibility of being a teacher, but they're not a teacher. And I don't undervalue any role within education, but I want your clear positionality. And if you're not a classroom teacher, don't fake it. Don't call yourself an educator in hopes that we all think you're a classroom teacher, and then you share expertise as if you're in that position. If you're in a role of academia or coach or whatever space you are in that educator space, I do think it's really important to say, you know what, I've learned a lot about podcasting. I've never done it before, but I think this would be great. And perhaps if you give it a try, you could let me know how it went. But the audacity of people to really masquerade in order to deliver content is so...
It's fraudulent. Authenticity is a hot commodity. I will say that. People are really chasing authenticity because authenticity does offer a lot of value in not just teaching, in any field that you are in. And I think when it comes to this whole idea, I think that consulting has just boomed in the last, I don't know how many, 10 years or so, where people are providing expertise on particular areas, but having been removed from that particular area for some period of time. Or if they had ever been in that area to begin with. So I think that in this effort to chase authenticity, a lot of people will label themselves as such in order to, as you said, gain that credibility, and to position themselves as people who have some sort of authentic knowledge about a particular topic, when in fact they probably don't. They don't have it, and they're faking it.
We could go on another rant, but
Go for it. Let's
just
hear it.
because as we talk about podcasting, I think about people that preach the use of new technologies and these, students will just this. And then I realized, but you've actually not been in a classroom to use that, so you don't know. And one thing I have discussed with my class a lot is sort of false narratives. Mm-hmm. And this idea, and it's not, I don't want to talk in absolutisms and generalities, but I need to start with the general to sort of push the conversation forward. This notion that students are far more advanced with technology than we are, or we think we are, I think is actually really a false narrative. I think there are a few, and I think people not in teacher spaces take those few and use it to represent the masses. My class they're a smart class, but what we have discovered is by no doubt do any of them have a superiority than me in the technological space that is sort of the underlying notion of how we operate. We operate that, if you give students these apps and these things, they're going to thrive. Actually, they don't. Most do not thrive unless you coach it, model it, give them the skills to be competent in it. It becomes overwhelming for them. And I think when I think about podcasting, a lot of people reach on to a company, a brand that's given them an app, a space, and then they create false narratives that students just thrive in these spaces. Walk into a classroom and see if a student instinctively thrives with every technology you give them. They don't. In fact, what happens is 2 or 3 do, and then we fixate on those 2 or 3 to create a real narrative of everyone does it, and then we set teachers up to gaslight it because when they don't start to use these technologies, teachers get blamed for saying, well, you're just not using these technologies, or our students would be thriving. Pause a second. I think there's a real false narrative, and this is why, Pav, when you talk about that authenticity, we need to hear those teacher stories, because I actually don't think the teacher voice is often heard often enough to know what's really working. I think certain educators are positioned as the teacher voice that are not current classroom teachers, haven't been in the post-COVID world, which led to a technology revolution. And if you haven't taught daily in that space, you actually don't know, as George Carlin would argue, but you don't know you don't know. Mm-hmm. And so you're ranting. I don't know if you ranted. I'm ranting on that. Some of the things I operate on my classes, students are very good at consuming low resolution content in the tech social media space, but you would be shocked if I told you how many struggle to navigate in the Google Suite space, despite having been immersed in the Google Suite space for 5 or 6 years, because we live on this false narrative that they all got it, they all know it, that they're all better than we are in that. But only a few are, and we've used that to cloud our judgment on how we need to teach these things, which comes back to the space of people pushing PD on just the app, of course they'll master, of course they'll figure it out. No. In class, I still with my grade 8s have to coach how to use Jamboard for almost 70%. I can take that back. Not almost, for 70% of students. Right. They just can't operate in that space effectively. And when they don't operate effectively because us as a teacher assume they can, then they disengage from the space. Sorry, Jamboard, you're gone in a year, but something else in that relation. So as you were talking, I made big leaps about the state of what students are capable of. It's not that they're not capable, but we go in with a real false sense of created narrative that they're all really good in those spaces, and we need to tap into it. That is not accurate.
I often wonder where those narratives stem from. Is it just the one person in the PD that has said, students are really great with technology and we should let them run with it and just go with it and they'll pick it up super fast, which I will say that most of them are pretty good at picking up new technology really quickly once introduced to it. But I often wonder where that narrative comes from. And then does everybody just make that assumption almost like an insecurity for a teacher, right? Especially a teacher who's maybe not so comfortable with technology in the first place, where they go in and they think to themselves, oh, the kids will just get it. They'll just get it. And then they don't, and then you don't do the intentional teaching to help them get it, and then they move on to the next grade not having it, or move on to the next whatever, the next phase, the next stage, not having that skill because the teacher assumed that they have it. They were never taught it. The students now are missing a gap. And I guess that you can apply this to anything. You can apply it to multiplication tables. You can apply it to adding with decimals. Like, I don't know. People do some teachers.
Except, and not to cut you off, Pav, but I cut you off, except no one expects students to just pick up the multiplication tables. We all definitively know that we need to teach it explicitly.
But then what if it was supposed to be taught in grade 2 or 3 or 4 or whenever, but for whatever reason, COVID, something, a teacher being absent and sick and missing a unit, and then there were a revolving door of substitute teachers, that specific skill was not intentionally taught to students, and then there's an assumption that they picked it up somehow. Because I feel like there's a lot of areas in education where this comes up, and it's not just this year, it's not just post-COVID. This is my entire career, that there are every year I find that there are some gaps that exist, and I wonder what happened. I wonder if teachers just assumed that students would know it and they overlooked that skill. And I can't say definitively, I can't say, there's so many variables for this. But like, I don't know what to attribute this to. And I'm probably complicit in the same thing. Maybe I'm overlooking something that is probably my responsibility to do. Maybe I noticed that kids don't know how to, use a particular app in the Google Suite, in Google Apps. And I just assume that they know how to use it. And then they go on to like grade 7 and 8 and they're completely missing a skill. So I don't know. I feel like this happens a lot. And I don't know why. But I do agree with you in that, kids don't necessarily automatically have a particular skill, that oftentimes these skills need to be taught, and it doesn't quite happen. It doesn't often happen.
I think I feel in the technology space, a lot of it is rooted with this notion that students are really comfortable navigating that space, and I actually don't believe it because I don't see it.
I'm sure that happens more so with teachers who are a little insecure with technology. I feel like that overlooking happens because there are some teachers that are uncomfortable with the technology themselves. Therefore, they do not explicitly teach it.
Fair. And the theme of this is that we're teaching an authentic podcast workshop.
Oh, is that where this
That's
from?
where
Yes.
this started from. In our PD session, we are not necessarily the greatest of podcasters, but... It says everyone that's recording in a studio, not around their kitchen table.
That's right.
But we have, as Tony Kornheiser would say, there's always a but. Mm-hmm. But we have used just about every means available to record student podcasts in almost every different subject matter. Mm-hmm. Now, predominantly in grade 6 through the grade 8 space, but there's very little podcast experience we cannot say we have not engaged in and have real artifacts to share, which include how it doesn't work, when it doesn't work, and all the obstacles in and around it.
Yes. And I think that what we can say is that in the past, when we have delivered this this presentation, which we have done so many times now, we always come away with, participants always come away with a real renewed excitement about attempting this in whatever capacity those teachers will present it to students in the classroom space or in the school community. There's always a lot of excitement about how it's going to be used, because storytelling is very important in our students' lives and our lives as educators in the world of education. And I think that this opportunity to provide a digital form of storytelling is very meaningful and very applicable to our classroom spaces. So bottom line, if you are in Toronto, if you are part of the Elementary Teachers of Toronto, please join us on December 8th at Beamfield Centre at the Canadian National Exhibition for a wonderful day of professional development.
Caps and sleeves are necessary.
Please dress appropriately.
And we'll be right back with the Chey and Pav Show.
Get your hands up to the floor.
You're listening to the Chey and Pav Show.
And welcome back. 20 minutes later. Remember, Pav, when I told you we would get this episode wrapped up in 15 minutes?
We've got 10 minutes to get through all of the content.
I didn't even get to point two of the things I wanted to banter about. But we move on. We're talking about our use of photography. Or no, sorry. I keep saying photography. Photos. And Pav, not that we haven't been using photos before. Maybe not intentionally. And maybe not being as observant of specifically when. And I want to say that our connection with Noah Daniel has probably been our biggest influence on really being intentional with how we're using photos. And she had always done a sort of Friday photos. I don't know if she called it Friday photos, but it was a photo where all the class engaged in what they saw, what they were looking at, what they inferred, and always these really rich and vibrant photos. And I know during the COVID time, which we'd already spoken about, I said, oh, wow, I like this. I'm going to, in the thinking classroom, I'm just going to mimic it. I'm going to do the same thing on Friday mornings. Our warm-up's going to be this photo activity. And I had great success with it. But I found that in the 3 years later, and this is, Pav, I'll, go off into another topic. When people ask me, is the movie any good? I said, I don't know. If I'm still talking about it 2 weeks later, then it was good.
Yeah.
Even if I don't know if it was good in the moment. And I know that Noah's influence on our work has been substantial because 3-4 years later, I'm really intentional in using photos in my room with my lessons, and it's expanded, and I've extended from what I know she had shared, as I'm sure she's extended as well, to build really rich use of photos in class as warm-up activities, but also as introductory activities, as heart of lesson activities, to use a photo to, as you said, 1,000 words within a photo.
Yes, and not just the words that are, so abundant from photographs, but the different perspectives. I think that in the times that I have used photographs in the classroom for many of the same reasons, minds-on activities, in the various different subjects that we teach. You teach language arts and history, geography. I teach math and science. Photographs have been equally as important in the subject areas that I teach as they are with yours. And the many times that I have used photographs in my classroom space, the different ideas and the different perspectives that students bring compared to what I, as an adult, bring to the deconstruction of those photographs has been like so vast, like so different. And I think that that's usually what gets me the most. It's like kids see something different than what adults see. And it all has to do with the schema, like what we are conditioned to see when we look at a particular photograph. There are some details that just stand out a lot more to certain age groups than they do to grown-ups. And I think that always blows my mind. Just doing the activity and observing what students are looking at and what they are observing, that to me, that has always been what really stands out. Like, we did an activity just yesterday, actually, that our SIP coach, Lynette Ballantyne, was gracious enough to develop a lesson that ties into climate change. And so as a minds-on activity, she had put up this photograph of an individual wearing a red, I don't know, I'm going to describe it as like a cloak. And of course, the way that I'm describing it is the way that I perceived this photograph. And this person is walking in the snow on a street in what looks like a neighborhood. There's cars kind of on the street, and this person is walking. And so this photo was put up on our white books across throughout the classroom. And students were to go and just answer a few questions about what they are seeing in this photo. I tell you, as I was walking around the room and the students are deconstructing this photograph, I'm just going, how? Like 6 different groups had talked about, one, it was an Among Us costume. It's not a cloak. And 2, they knew that this was trick-or-treating. This was Halloween. It was a province that was in the prairies, and it's got to be a province in the prairies because that's the only place where it snows on the end of October. And so it had to be one of those cities that are a little bit north and west from where we are in Ontario. And I'm just looking around the room, and I'm talking to Lynette, and I'm saying, I can't even believe that they put these things together. And I had no idea. I thought it was a hazmat suit that this person was wearing in the picture. And I had no idea that this is and we were laughing about it because she said, that's exactly what I thought. And then when students had deconstructed the exact same photograph, they brought all kinds of additional knowledge in, and they were making connections that I had no idea about. And so I came away from that activity thinking, I'm really not doing this enough. I'm not bringing photographs into the classroom enough. I do it every once in a while as a minds-on task, but it is not enough. We could talk about pictures every single day in class, and we would probably do so much learning from that deconstruction. But that's my little story about the impact that it's had in my classroom and how in awe it always leaves me.
Pav, when I think about resources or access points for students, we're always trying to differentiate, and we don't want to establish necessarily that one is better than another, but, as Tony Kornheiser would say, when I do some comparative research or action research, I don't know if you get to call it research. I call it research because there's 30 bodies in my room. But if I'm trying to introduce a topic and I'm trying to I'm just introducing it through talk, I'm introducing it through a story, I'm introducing it through a video, or I'm introducing it through a photo, I've always found the photo generates the most engagement and most conversation. Mm-hmm. I think by default, similar to my pre-rant, there's this assumption that a great video is a great video. But I have found my grade 8s are not really good at consuming a video, whether it's 20 minutes or 10 minutes or 5 minutes. It's almost like when it's a super polished video, there's a disconnect because there's a belief that it's so out of reach or that it's so polished that it's not something I'm going to dive into. So when I've been teaching history this year, I've tried to have these little clips, these little videos, and I have just observed and said, students, check out of videos. Yeah. And yes, I can manage them and I can assign tasks to make them engage, but ultimately it's fake. It's performative. They're not really into the video. Yeah. And so the photo in many different ways I've introduced this deconstructing photos narrative is always generated high levels of engagement, very few redirects, very few needing to guide students to maintain their focus on these tasks. I've done it in a couple different ways. In a Jamboard, and I've expanded on what my original use of Noah Daniels' work. And so when I create my template has what do you see? What do you wonder? What can you infer? And I put in brackets, tell the story behind the picture. Then I say create 3 hashtags, and they always look at me funny. Hashtag, Mr. Cheney? What are you talking about? I said, I'm trying to be youthful, trying to connect to your space.
But do kids use hashtags?
I don't know. I actually thought I was being really connective to what they were, and they were like, I don't think they don't.
No,
I had now I'm becoming the hypocrite because I made the assumption that hashtags was their world.
Yeah,
that I had to teach them about hashtags.
That's right. I don't think hashtags are part of this generation.
No,
I think it's our generation that uses hashtags more.
Hashtag Chey and Pav.
Hashtag Chey and Pav, that's right.
Hashtag Federation Day. Hashtag see you there.
Hashtag deconstructing photos.
And then I went from hashtag, which it's been the one that's been the least well received or the most coaching. What are you talking about, Mr. J? What's a hashtag? What do you mean? You mean just a hashtag? Just like, and then, you just hashtag life, hashtag homeless. Because I say homeless because on one particular task, we were doing a art assignment to bring awareness to youth homelessness in Rexdale. And so I had curated my introduction to the whole unit was a photo, a very ambiguous photo. You couldn't tell gender, you couldn't tell where it was, you could barely tell. You could tell they were homeless, you could tell they were struggling, but it was such a great picture because there were so many unanswered questions. And that's why I use that as an example because it popped into my mind. Now back to from hashtags, then I go give the picture a title. And then I actually use the deconstructing photos as a way of introducing the concept of annotation that I want to do later in text. But I find the picture is a better starting space to learn how to annotate on a Jamboard per se, extract information and actually not just say here, but draw the lines, put the sticky notes. And so we use that as a means of for me to teach annotation. And so that's how I set up my deconstruction of photos. I gave that one example, but ultimately I found that, yes, as a warm-up activity, but so much value in, as I go back to my original, I've seen more value in that as one, like my startup for history, yes. But then on an individual unit, they have been the really great catalyst for conversation. So I could think of history in a couple of different topics, but I'll talk about the railway because I just did it this week. And I curated, the last spike, the very infamous picture, but also a picture behind the scenes riddled with racism and, propaganda. So I found contradictory pictures, or I guess you would say more authentic pictures. And then I took pictures of the bridges and the railways and actually pictures of the trains because I realized originally I was making the assumption that they would have in their mind what a train would look like back then in the 1860s in the formation of Canada. And I just curated, I made a choice board of photos, and then they chose which photo they were going to deconstruct.
Right.
And it was a powerful point because then when I started to talk about railways and we had our story about railways, you could just see that the level of engagement was already heightened. Their thoughts were already validated. Their observations were already validated. And it reminds me of like prediction work. It doesn't matter whether what you see is right or wrong when you see the article, etc. Because I had one student actually had an entire story. It was a picture of the railway, and it was all the workers working on the railway, which is hundreds of workers, because nothing is mechanical. But the students observed that they thought that these workers, they didn't call them workers, were refugees that were fleeing from war, and that they were running through the forest.
Right.
Because they just saw them all on the train tracks. They didn't make the, I don't want to say they didn't make the connection. What they saw is what they saw.
Right.
But their own personal connections were is that they didn't anticipate that this many people were needed to actually build the railway.
Right.
So if there was this many people, they must be fleeing from someone. But just having made that really rich observation meant that when they learned what was actually going on, the knowledge was solidified because it was comparative to what they had seen and what they originally had thought. And so that lesson on the railway, more so than me just telling them or a video saying, there was hundreds of people that worked on it, it was what they saw, what it made the connection with. It was powerful.
Because they are now linking it to what they didn't know. They're making that is a permanent indentation in their gray matter. Like that is that's really you're right. That is very powerful because I don't think I've ever considered that when they discover that they're completely wrong about something, that is solidifying that knowledge in their minds.
When I, because I teach the literacy, when I teach predicting, I often say it's not actually about whether it's right or wrong. It's about the level of detail you put in your prediction will forge and cement that learning because you'll always remember where you were right and where you were wrong. So if you make a general prediction, it won't be lasting.
Right.
But if you make that rich prediction with lots of details, that's what makes the prediction valuable. It doesn't even matter if it's right or wrong. It's almost insignificant.
Right.
It's that connection piece right there.
Right. And for that to be true, a student has to be connected to what they are engaged in. They have to be, I guess by definition, engaged with the task. And so I think that photos allow students to become a little bit more engaged, as you mentioned with your anecdote about the videos. Again, something that I hadn't really considered, that the more polished a video is, the less likely they're going to connect with it. And maybe that has to do with the authenticity. It could have to do with the level of connection that they have with the person who made the video. And I think that's why TikTok does so well, is because these are videos that are made by creators just like them. People who are of the same age group, the same generation, people who are seeing things the same way that they are. Whereas you have a professional production in terms of a video, there's a certain level of, I don't know, removal from that, from where those students are. So I think that is some real food for thought for myself as well. So that doesn't happen very much.
When I think of my lessons, what are always the letdowns are always curated videos that I know are supposed to be really good, and they are really good. They just don't land.
They don't land. You're right. You're absolutely right about that.
Let me come back.
Okay.
How you can introduce these photos. So one, if you want the template, Pav has added the Jamboard template to our notes.
Okay.
And
yes, I have.
Yes, and you better do that before Jamboard says, no more jams for you.
I know.
But I've had great success with that. Now, I have introduced that Jamboard space individually, and I've also done it as group work. I've also gone, and to get out of that space, I've also simply photocopied the pictures,
Yep.
put them on chart paper, posted them around the wall, and had groups rotate through, or put them on the table, and groups work with markers and sticky notes,
Yep.
also as successful. Individual on smaller sheets or group work. And Pat, I want to come back to the work you did with Lynette, because I can connect to that. How she introduced or fused, I would call it fusion. I hope you can read my mind on this one. The
Okay.
fusion of how photography with other learning frameworks.
With other learning frameworks.
I believe when she had those photos, she used their white books.
Oh, yes. Oh, I thought that I had made that clear already, but no, they
No,
had.
I don't think you had.
Oh, no, I guess I hadn't.
No. We wear caps and sleeves at this level, son.
Yeah, so she put them up on our white book stations that I've got 9 stations up and around the room where students work on their thinking classrooms tasks. And so we were able to use those white books for this particular purpose. And so I even put the students in their randomized groups, and the students went to those groups and they deconstructed the photo on the white books, and I found that to be very helpful, because there was a level of editability with the work that students were providing, and the same ideas where students have the ability to look around the room, and we're a little stuck, we don't really know what we're looking at here, and they kind of peek around the room. Oh yes, this is a Halloween costume. And so they were able to employ some of those strategies of thinking classrooms that we've talked about in episode 131 to this particular task. And I thought that was definitely a really great way to merge those two concepts together. And that wasn't all. There were lots of great tasks that were included in this lesson plan as well, like even so far as to go with different software that students can use to sort of map out what they're thinking in terms of science and climate change. And so it was a really good way for students to have access to different teachable, technology and pedagogy and software and different things that we can do to access the learning in so many different ways. And I thought that was really great.
I also had great success with the fusion of the thinking classroom model, the white books. And the part that makes it the thinking classroom, Pav, you talked about that, is the comfortability. Is that a word?
Comfort?
If it's not, that's an easy word.
That's too
Everyone's
easy.
got that.
Comfortability.
Yeah, who's got that in their vernacular?
No, I love it. It's
honestly, don't caps and sleeves, caps and sleeves. Was that the ability for students to be able to quickly iterate and make changes without sort of this permanency of a potential mistake, which I know we've talked about, I think in the Frank Bouchard interview about the power of white book, is that's one of the powers of the thinking classroom that we actually didn't speak a lot about in our thinking classroom episode, because we talked more about implementation. Was there's a level of comfort for students to be able to write down a quick thought because it's so easily erased. Not that we're advocating to erase, but on a student's level of comfort, if they need to quickly erase and know they can erase, they're more inclined to put down a thought.
Yeah.
And something in my class I've always talked about, the only way you have a really great thought is if it's coupled with a bunch of good thoughts, average thoughts, and bad thoughts. Like the idea of there's no stupid questions. Actually, there's lots of stupid questions. There are. Are you comfortable to ask them to know that we get to a certain point? The stupid question moves my learning forward.
Right. And there's something that I've learned in the process as well, is that my stupid question, what I think is going to be a stupid question, it may not be a stupid question.
Because 95% of people don't want to ask the same question because they're afraid it's stupid.
100%.
No, I said 95.
95%. So, absolutely.
So I wanted to, that thinking classroom model, that fusion. I'm going to come back to some of the lessons I've done with it, because I talked about the history one, and I've talked about a little bit how did I set up the photos. I have given different groups different photos, and then we have shared sort of their information through the photos. I've given everyone the same photo, and then I've also got Dawn. I've dawned upon everyone. I've done the choice board where I'll give multiple photos and then the students choose which one they want to go through. And each is always provided real value. I'll share an anecdote. I talked about the project I did with youth homelessness in Rexdale and just how powerful that photo went. I will say just one marker for teachers. Make sure you cite where you're finding your photo from.
Yes.
Because I once had, actually, I don't even want to say, actually, I don't even know what I want to say. Give me a second. I cited it. And when students were looking at the photo, they used the site because they wanted to know more information. So as much as they had their ideas, there also the curiosity was sparked to, oh, there is a space where I can actually find what this is and maybe get a little bit more information. So that citation one is morally responsible, but it's also an access point for students to maybe go a little bit further and find out something if they are really curious. Now, I would advocate to maybe not rush to the answer right away, but do make sure that space is there. I also did a really cool one to use pictures for financial literacy in regards to connection to social justice work.
Right.
Because I remember we were, as a class, we went to pick some photos. And so I would pick different racialized groups and money to find a photo. And it was really shocking the type of imagery associated with different ethnicities in relation to money that generated some wild conversation.
Yes, I remember that.
What genders and ethnicities were associated with really positive and affirming and righteous associations with money, and which ones were not. Oh, the conversation was so in-depth. And I'll probably tell you that of all the learning around financial literacy, that lesson just it affirmed why we needed to pay attention to this, because students were so drawn to something as maybe as simple as, oh, I'm just going to calculate an interest level. There's a lot more behind our association with different ethnicities and genders and money. And so the photos brought that really to life, brought a real rich conversation. We talk about those courageous conversations. There were some courageous conversations in my class that year, because I didn't teach math this year, so I haven't used it this year when I did it, because the generation of what images were showing just was rich and vibrant. And I'll leave it to you to go explore with yourself. So our class collectively started to talk about, let's find some images, and we use some criteria in our search, and then we use that as an access point to really talk about sort of digital citizenship, or being really critical of what's out there in that digital media age, what's being thrust in your face as the stories or the narratives around that. So I had some fantastic value generated by that deconstructing photo in that particular landscape of math and financial literacy. And
that brings me to that piece where, including photographs in our lessons can help us with the content that we want to teach, but it also can lend us to so many other conversations that perhaps we didn't intend to bring into the conversation, but we should be talking about, like many of these social justice aspects. Like, these things come up when we are presenting photographs of real life people who actually exist, and the things that that they want to talk about, that they see that perhaps we are not seeing. We've been conditioned to not see. And I think that brings us so many valid conversations that need to be had in the classroom space. And if we take the time to actually address these things, it makes the lessons, again, so much richer, but then also cements them in the students' learning. Maybe not so much about the content that we had hoped to teach through that photograph, but so many other valuable things that can be brought into our learning spaces that we should be bringing into those learning spaces. And so, and But they are.
There are. And even beyond just the pictures of financial literacy, there are all kinds of talking points to be addressed
That's
in
right.
regards to equity and financial literacy. And I believe in our episode in financial literacy,
We talked about
we
that a little.
talked
Yeah.
about this.
And that's something that students may not be aware of, and that we should be talking about in those spaces, because that's not something that they're thinking about. And so I think that opens up some eyes, and it doesn't have to be at like the high school level. It can be at the grade 6, 5, 4 level. These are things that students should be thinking about. I remember having some equal types of conversation with students in regards to something that comes to my mind immediately is we were having conversations about mother figures around Mother's Day, and students wanted to do something for Mother's Day. And so we had conversations about what motherhood looks like in its different forms. And when I asked students to find photographs and find pictures that are representative of what you view as motherhood, or this sort of parental capacity that women, or, any mother figures that might have, and the pictures that students brought to me gave me a lot of insight into what students had been exposed to, what children had been exposed to as what motherhood is. And so it was interesting, because we had some real good conversations about, what families look like, and what different types of families there are. And even though this was like the grade 6 level, it was very interesting to hear and see what students had to bring to that conversation.
So you asked students to bring in photos? Or just
to find photos.
Find photos in relation to the concept of their understanding of motherhood. That's brilliant, to be honest, because, when I think of the educational landscapes, it's sometimes so progressive that we outsmart ourselves and refuse to talk about things that need to be talked about. And we know this concept of Mother's Day or Father's Day will bring up all kinds of really not dismissive academic arguments, but they're academic, because in our classrooms they matter. But they matter in the sense that, how are we opening up our kids to bring their definition of, I like how you use the term motherhood more so than Mother's Day, because what will happen is everyone will shut it down because, it's Mother's Day. I got it. It can be traumatic. I got it. So, but stopping it entirely is not the solution. You don't need to, you can read any clinical psychology and know that that's not the solution. But we get so progressive in our thoughts that in order to shelter everyone, we don't do anything. We don't talk about anything. And all of a sudden we're now going against what the research will tell us. And so I even beyond photos, Pav, just hearing you tell us about, we wanted students to expand, not just fixate on the mother, but your idea of motherhood, because now it opens the definition, the extension of what that motherhood role could look like.
Right.
And then it becomes a conversation point, and then it becomes a sharing point. And then all of a sudden there's learning and growing and affirming. Yeah. And if there is some trauma, it gets addressed.
It can get addressed. And there are some things that I'm actually not going to speak about in terms of specific examples that students had brought to me, but there was one that I will talk about. A student who had a picture of a much older woman and a child, like somebody who you would categorize as a grandparent, as a grandmother, and with a child. And I just kind of wanted to know a little bit more. I was like, oh, that's a very interesting photo that you chose. And I said, so this is the mother and this is the child, sort of to prompt the conversation. And then the child said, no, this is a grandmother, because a grandmother can be a mother as well to a grandchild. And I, not that I pried or that I, wanted to know more about that child's personal story.
You provided a learning opportunity, and the student gifted you some story.
That's right. And the student gifted me some story. And so it opens up these opportunities for students to talk about or to tell story about things that perhaps they wouldn't come out and outright tell us, but there's an opportunity for them to tell that story.
That's powerful, Pav. This story is powerful. And for all the folks that feel pressured to just on many different levels take certain things out of their curriculum. In the bigger picture, we're not doing any good. Perhaps we're exercising our privilege to be able to choose about what we do not talk about in school. That's powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, it was powerful. And it's probably one of those highlights that in my teaching career as well, just in terms of my own learning around that area.
I think that's a perfect place to take a little break. We'll come back
with a little swag bag.
And we'll wrap this up.
Sounds great to me.
And you're listening to, of course,
the Chey and Pav Show.
I was going to say the Pav Show with just a little bit of Chey here and there.
10%.
Get your hands up to the floor.
And you're listening to the Chey and Pav Show. And this episode is brought to you by Rodecaster mics. Because if we didn't have them, you wouldn't have us in your ear pods right now. And if you're associated with Rodecaster, please send us a check. $50, $75. Well, I'll take 10. Hey, if you got a half-used Tim Hortons coupon, send it along. Pav, sorry, I'll get you later on that. As long as it's $1.50.
Thanks.
And now we're back with our show, and we've been talking about deconstructing photos and our influences. Noah Daniel specifically, although I think we've all used photos in our classrooms, but we've had a really rich conversation, Pav, about being really intentional with our use of photos. I know Noah has really influenced us that way. We sort of shared our framework. We sort of shared some of our wins, and we've had a little bit of debate as to where in this hierarchy of relevance does a photo place in other ways of bringing in conversation. And we talk a lot about stories, but who knows? Maybe the photo, as I'm thinking about this episode, maybe the photo is just as powerful, maybe more powerful than a story to introduce a topic, to generate conversation for a topic, because it's so open-ended. Not that I want to dismiss the story, but certainly as we go through this episode, I almost am coaching myself and talking myself through why the videos that I curate a lot just don't seem to generate the conversation, the engagement, the way a photo would.
Yes, and I'll have to say that there's context for everything. Photos are just a real good, quick and easy snapshot way of introducing any sort of talking point within our learning. It can be a consolidation point. It could be a minds-on sort of a way to initiate the thinking and initiate a particular topic, or it can be thrown in there to sort of bring that learning around. And I think that it's in whatever context we're using it, I think it's valid and it's important. And I think it just provides a lot of learning opportunity within the classroom context. And I've only seen great value from it. So I love using photographs in the classroom.
Should we start a swag bag?
Yeah, I think so.
I don't think I did the swag bag properly on the Thinking Classroom episode.
It was a long episode. I think
it was an hour and a half.
Yeah.
That's probably why Peter didn't finish listening.
No.
We never tagged Peter in that episode, but I said, don't. Let's see if someone in the Thinking Classroom that's far closer in that circle than we are highlights that episode. Because ultimately, I would argue on that episode, it's a critical artifact to what the Thinking Classroom can look in with classroom teachers.
Yes,
but we're not talking about the Thinking Classroom at the moment, although we have infused the Thinking Classroom with our deconstructing photos. Our swag bag, I don't know if I have to name them off or number them off, Pav. It's use and immerse yourself in that space of photos. Bring them in. If you want, follow the template we have, or pick an item, or expand and extend and reshare with us. Because I would probably argue my use of photos I'm very comfortable with now, very confident with. And I know it was the work of Noah Daniel that inspired me to model and mimic and then extend and expand. And so we have that framework of what do I see? What do I wonder? What's the inference? Tell the story behind the photo. I like the hashtag, but as we sort of talked about, maybe it's not really relevant anymore.
Yeah.
Create a title, and then I love annotating that photo because it's a great way to tie into any subject of how do you annotate text. Well, let's start with a photo. And then, of course, it can be for history. It can be for science. It can be for math. It can be for language. It can be your warm-up. It can be how you introduce a topic. It can be something you come back to. It can be an individual task. It can be a group task. It can be a digital task. It can be a non-digital task. There's so many spaces, and we can infuse it with other pedagogies because, of course, teaching is not an absolute. And the conversation that Pav and I share are not absolutes. This is how we're feeling on photography on this particular date that I don't know. But it might change in 2 weeks. Maybe your comments, your interaction with this episode inspires us to do more learning. And I think that's what teaching is. It's an understanding that this is where I am now, and our conversation is not the learning. It's the conversation that this reflection generates that allows us all to grow collectively.
Absolutely.
And
You
so-
said that perfectly.
We should have recorded that. Oh, wait, we did. I'll just push that on autoplay next time. You've been listening to the Chey and Pav Show, episode 643.
132.
For all you people that are trying to catch up to us. Pav, anything to add on our way out?
No, I think that's everything. I do have some additional thoughts, I think, I'll save for next time, as you were talking about, but I want to throw in there, because I know it's a conversation that's coming to us soon, a little bit of artificial intelligence.
Ooh la la.
Yeah, so...
Don't worry, our students know how to use that entirely.
Yeah, that's right. But
I got some stories of that one.
I know.
That's a good teaser, Pav.
it's a good teaser, because it's coming soon. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on episode 132 of the Chey and Pav Show, Deconstructing Photographs.
Say hey. I play like maize and I hit like haze.